Hello, welcome to our third week of LEA 200. I hope things are going well for you. And let's take a look at this week's topics. We'll get into more about leadership, ethics, and how they are related, kind of continuing on with last week's discussion. Obviously, not all leadership theories involve ethics. Perhaps that's part of the problem with some of those. We'll talk about different leadership styles here in the discussion. Transformational leadership, for example. Strong and charismatic leaders aid in the change process, but during crises things such as personal restraint, sensitivity to social values that they may demonstrate, when things aren't in a crisis mode, they become subservient to getting the job done or the immediate needs. So if you think about law enforcement, some of the things that we could encounter a hostage situation or a natural disaster, and we have to take care of the immediate process and not, use the slow process of considering others' input and that sort of thing to get it done. And more modern theories have shifted because of this. And one of the things that takes into account the circumstances in addition to the leadership style is the managerial grid. Blake and Mouton developed this, and it's one that I have gravitated towards since I started studying leadership back in my undergrad days. And I'll show you a little graph about that. And we're seeing more and more of that. So as we talk about leadership theories and ethics, understand too that we have to think about the situation in which it is applied. Not all leadership theories, if you subscribe to one, you're not going to find one that really works well in every circumstance. So included in the grid, though, Blake and Mouton's grid, which we'll go ahead and shift to that, is the concern for the welfare of others. So you can see it kind of talks about leaders who are high in concern for people or low, and high in concern for results or low. So if you think about the basic managerial theories that leadership theory started with way back when, most of that was about productivity, assembly line type of work. How do we get the most out of people? And there was typically a low concern for individuals and their rights and how they feel and that sort of thing. Well, as time has progressed, I think they determined, in fact, the Hawthorne study was one of the management studies where they determined that by increasing lighting in an area where they were doing assembly line work, it increased productivity. So put two and two together. Well, when you think about people and what their needs are, sometimes your productivity goes up. And Mouton's managerial grid takes that into account. Now, again, we have a crisis situation. Our concern for people is probably going to drop because we need results and we need them immediately. The military is a good example of that. But when it returns to normal, you should probably reinstitute some concern for people. So the three pillars of ethical leadership models, the different pillars include intent of individuals or character, proper means or duty, and proper ends, the greatest good. The first is the intent of individuals, and this relates to a person's character and the reason why we look for ethical people when we first hire them. Is character enough, though? As noted and earlier in the course, we talked about it's not really, but it is a good start. If you have somebody who is ethical, it's a good start, and it's easier to build them. Now, second concern is selecting the proper means for doing good. How do we achieve what we're trying to accomplish? We are guided by society's morals, the ethics of law enforcement duty, rules, and the like, those types of things. However, it really doesn't take long in leadership to be thrust into a situation where you are faced with conflicts between these life rules that exist. You want to accomplish something, but you find yourself violating one of the rules in order to meet the other. And that happens all the time. And a third concern is the proper ends. Our behavior is meant to satisfy the value of those that we serve in law enforcement, the citizens, right? The ends achieve this. Who do we serve? We serve the citizens, the elected bodies, our fellow officers, our profession. At times, we run into conflicts with those as well. So, in honoring our profession, We may irritate our elected officials that we work for, or the citizens may not like an approach that we use because we're trying to attempt to enforce the laws. But with all three, ethical leadership tends to provide a higher quality of life for all individuals involved, higher organizational performance on average, and a greater sense of trust and pride for those affected, and greater sustainability over time. It's just tough to achieve all these pillars. Let's take a look at them individually and how the pillars relate to management styles. So we'll start with intent-based models. You have virtuous leadership, and this is really the high integrity type of leadership. The five most common hallmarks of integrity: honesty, trustworthiness, fairness, prudence, and conscientiousness. We talked about those a little bit last week too. This theory relies upon finding this exact leader who has all these virtuous characteristics and integrity, and hoping that they can carry these traits forward. And even with these traits, there can be conflict between them, despite how noble they sound. So, honesty and fairness and prudence and conscientiousness. Well, fairness, we know, is subjective. One person may think something is fair and the other does not. And we're never going to satisfy everybody. That's one of the first things you learn as a leader, is that at some point you're going to make a decision that's going to make some happy and others not. And so fairness becomes an issue. Let's move on to the other intent-based model of leadership, and that is authentic leadership. Sounds very good. And positive leadership, right? Very nice terms to use. We all want somebody to work with someone who's authentic and positive. So authentic leadership emphasizes the traits that ensure self-awareness, self-improvement, and positive leadership emphasizes the traits that reflect openness, transparency, and optimism. So self-awareness, we're able to look at ourselves and determine when we need some training and professional development to move us forward. And obviously, transparency is openness to hearing the input from others. So the core values of authentic leadership: trustworthiness, credibility, respect for others, fairness, accountability. There's that fairness again, and other aspects of basic personal integrity. Authentic leaders develop positive psychological capital with followers as long as these traits hold true. So if you have a fairness issue, authentic leaders tend to lose a bit with their followers if they think they weren't treated fairly. And as we said, that can be subjective. But these leaders take charge of their emotional health and enhance the moral awareness and emotional health of others. That's ethical. And the definitions are a bit all-encompassing, though. Many people might fit or think they fit into this category. And also, people who tend to emphasize the positive so much can lead to blindly following this positive route and disregard sometimes there just is some negative in some situations. And if we don't think about the negative, we're not prepared for the negative when it happens. So interesting when we look at the ethical implications of these models. Let's move on to a different pillar. So the means-based models, the second pillar. First one is moral management. Some people call it ethics training or the low road or the compliance model. And this approach is not only expressed in legislative and regulatory documents, but in things like codes of conduct, oaths of office, professional standards documents, those types of things. And basically, we are regulating morality. Does this exist in law enforcement? You bet. We have tons of policies, tons of procedures, tons of codes of conduct that are a matter of practice. So moral management, it does work, but it has some weaknesses. An excessive focus on prohibition and an excessive negativism. We just talked about positivity. It can also be overly negative. We're going to manage the heck out of you, that type of thing. Bad implementation. If you get a manager who is overly into moral management, they can really make people's lives miserable and focus. And the problem of dealing with executive corruption: what if your leader is not a good moral guide? Then moral management rings very hollow. Overly structured morality regulations can lead to rigidity by leaders in terms of excessive cautiousness, micromanagement, and inflexibility too. You can overmanage. The same end is sought in moral management, but instead of dictated rules, it relies upon training and education and principles that will guide ethical decision making and weighing competing values. Higher level codes of ethics serve as an overall guide for behaviors. This approach relies upon the expertise of managers to make, we're talking about professionally grounded leadership a bit, to make the right decision, and it recognizes that you can't write a rule for everything. At some point in time, somebody has to make a decision based upon the unique circumstances that are presented, and this is what professionally grounded leadership is about. Train people to make an ethical decision rather than giving them every situation they may encounter and saying, here's the ethical approach that you take. Particularly in law enforcement, we're never going to be able to do that because things are so, the situations we encounter are unique every day. To be honest with you, that's what attracted me to this job. I wanted a job where every day was different. Negatives are that it's expensive, it's time consuming to train people, and it's a little bit open ended too, and there can be some interpretation in how people approach things. All right, finally, we're going to talk about the proper ends pillar, the last one, social responsibility models. They variously emphasize concern for others, righteousness, concern for the community, and concern for the environment. They're well named social responsibility. They include things like servant leadership, spiritual leadership, and corporate social responsibility leadership. Sounds very good and very applicable to today, right? We hear a lot about social responsibility and concern for society at large. Servant leadership is the leader who is privileged to serve the people. That's how they look at it. They don't look at it as the people are privileged to have them as a leader, vice versa. So you can see a clear connection to social responsibility and law enforcement. We want to serve our community. We want to make our community better. And social responsibility fits that well. It sounds very ethical too, and for the most part, it is a very high ethical category, but it's difficult to balance social responsibility, and that's kind of like fairness. What's the definition? Moving on, transforming leaders. Last but not least, those who understood the need for change emanating from within the people they work with, the people who you could say are subordinate to them. They are the ones who drive change, and they clarify those needs and create wholesome long-term changes that benefit society at large too. So these types of leaders transcend or at least balance their personal needs for success with the good of community. Transforming leadership is a model that requires the leader to subordinate their own needs and desires to those of the organization and the affected community. So a very moral leadership model in that you are considering what are the community's needs as a law enforcement professional over what are my personal needs. So transformational leadership is a very high level of morality as far as the leadership spectrum goes. All right, those are just a few models. There's tons of different leadership models. We could spend just months talking about this. So here's a few though, and some of the ethical slants associated with them. And I hope this helped you out in interpreting some of the material. I look forward to reading your discussions, and we'll see you in the on the boards, and we'll see you with next week's guidance too. Take care, everybody.